Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Star Conspiracies fireside chat on customer advocacy. We got people who are trickling in. We'll, wait a few moments before we get kicked off with the festivities. But while people are joining, I want to start off with a moment of gratitude before we get into the housekeeping items, why we're here. But first, I guess, introductions. Y'all know me. I'm Steve Smith. I'm one of the partners here at the Star Conspiracy, Chief Marketing Officer, and I'm really happy today to be joined by my friend Patrick Rooney. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm thrilled to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. I think it's going to be a great conversation today. And I think one that, based on the conversations that I've been having in market right now, a very timely one. So, but before we start off, why don't we start off with just a quick moment of gratitude, and I'll kick things off. I wanted to express gratitude for one of the people on my team, Joanna Castle. My very able colleague has helped us kick off a new blog series called The Founder 15 that we're doing. We are showcasing different founders of companies and just try to put a human face on what these folks are doing, not just with their company, but kind of their professional path. And so, Joanna, thank you so much for all the great work that you've done on that. Super grateful to have you on the team. I'll pass it over to you now, Patrick. What's your moment of gratitude for today?
I'll tell you, my moment of gratitude is for healthcare workers. My house has been, we're COVID free, which is good, but we have been bowled over by flu and cold. And so if you see me sipping something, a big trough, this is herbal immunity boosting tea here. So I don't catch what my daughter, who has been home for 3 days, I don't catch what she has. But, the healthcare workers, I think are just remarkable.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's just like, this has definitely been a difficult winter in that regard. I know a lot of the folks on our team have, especially the working parents, are kind of getting it from all angles, where it's just like, you're working from home, then one of the kiddos gets sick, then another, and before you know it, the whole house is kind of laid low.
Yeah, it's a domino. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, they keep working, it's just like, and I think, hats off to, all of you working parents out there that are finding a way to make it happen in spite of all of the illness and the interruption. So thanks for all your great work. Awesome. All right, well, cool. Well, let me get us kicked off today. We're going to be talking about customer advocacy, and this is something that Patrick and I, we talk about this regularly all the time. We're both very much believers in it, and really just to, before I kind of turn it over to Patrick to kind of do his introduction, I want to just kind of set the context of why it's more important, or why we see it as being more important in 2023 than ever. And it's just, one of the things that's very clear from everything that we're seeing in market is, for companies to grow this year, net new logo acquisition is going to be incredibly difficult. It's just, there are, the CFO is getting in everybody's ear about spend, and then there's a lot of kind of wait and see going on. And we really believe that if you're going to hit your growth goals this year, it's going to have to come from expanding your share of wallet from existing customers. They already know you. If they have already kind of bought into you and see you as someone who is making their life better and solving problems for them, getting them to buy off on additional spend is going to be far easier this year than bringing in those new customers. So that's why we're here. And so what we want to talk about today is, really kind of defining, it's just kind of what we see going on in the market in that regard, what companies are doing right and wrong. We know that it's a challenge, but just try to offer some recommendations and best practices, some guidance that everyone on the webinar can take away and put into action for them. So, Patrick, with all that said as context, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and tell your audience who you are, why you're here, and then we can kind of dive into it.
Great, thank you very much. Again, I'm Patrick Rooney. I'm the founder and CEO of Seventh Echo, which is a consulting firm focused on helping companies to cultivate advocates and leverage them to specifically help to drive revenue growth. I've been involved with advocacy for a long time, and it really stems from an interest in what shapes people's perceptions and buying behaviors, right? What is it that can get them to do what you want them to do? Whether that was, starting in enterprise computers or HR tech, cars, restaurants, right? What are the triggers that make somebody want to buy? I started out obviously in PR marketing. About 15 years ago, I co-founded a word of mouth and social media marketing company called Zocalo Group that was focused on leveraging the social media, the various social media channels to help companies to get their fans to share their experiences and make recommendations, right? And then shifted to focus on organizations and how organizations could use social media as a channel to share their story. And lo and behold, nowhere in the organization was it more powerful than in talent acquisition, right? And employer branding. And so I had a company called Q Social that helped companies to get their employees to share their stories with their friends and their networks, right? To attract their birds of a feather flock together, right? To attract them. So, I guess you could say that I'm a huge advocate for advocacy because I see the power of it. And look, at the end of the day, we all want to hear from people who have been in our shoes, who have walked in our shoes, that are facing the same challenges that we have, right? And so, if that's what we're wanting, how is it that organizations can make that happen? And so I'm super excited to get into that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And I think that, obviously we've been kind of beating the drum around customer experience because there's, no shortage of data out there that shows that, the experience that a brand creates is as important as any product or service that it offers. And there's a lot of just widespread dissatisfaction in really across work tech. We cite this bit of research from Aspect 43 of almost 2/3 of work tech customers would replace their solution, or if given the opportunity. And so when 2/3 of a potential audience isn't happy, it's just like that definitely speaks to a CX crisis going on. When you think about the link and the connection between customer advocacy and customer experience, where do you think that is? What does that say to you?
Look, I think that the experience is the linchpin, right, of advocacy, right? Advocacy is not something that you can engineer or manufacture, right? Advocates are earned. It's the result of having a great experience, right? Whether that's with a product or a service, right? Advocates want to, because of their experience, because they got so much value, or simply just had a great time, they want to sing praises, right? And that comes in a lot of different forms, whether that's word of mouth over dinner, or sharing it on social media, or an overt act, right, on behalf of a company, like a case study on the voice of the customer, things that we think of. And that's important for a number of reasons, right? Beginning again with the fact that we want to hear from people who are like us, right? The old stat from Nielsen that 92% of people trust a friend, a peer, or trusted source over any advertising or marketing, right? And that's because of the authenticity, right? And so we want to, the experience, if you have a great experience, right, you're going to want to share that. I think that the other reason why organizations should be really focused on this and concerned about it is because it has real business implications, right? There's a great stat out of Harvard Business School that cited a 12% increase in advocacy, customer advocacy, leads to a 200% increase in revenue growth.
Wow.
Which, I mean, when you think about that, that's sensational. And so let's cut that in half, right? Let's dial that back a little bit. That's 100% growth. Even if it's 50% growth, doesn't matter, right? I think the message there is, look, advocacy has an impact on revenue growth. And so I think those organizations that are focused on advocacy, and then dialing back, focused on the experience and what that experience is, right, are the ones that are going to win.
Well, and so here's what I've always found, really fascinating, the kind of the paradox about customer advocacy is, even just since like we sent out the invitation for the webinar, I've had a number of conversations in sales with, founders, CEOs, heads of marketing saying, yeah, I can't wait to listen in because, we need to be doing, XYZ with our own customer advocacy program. And, more often than not, it's just like the people who are running companies, running sales and marketing functions understand that it's important, yet it doesn't get done. It doesn't happen. Why, in your experience, why is that? Where's that disconnect occurring? What's going on?
I think part of it is creating space for it, right? I think we can all agree now that advocacy is important, right? Having customers as your champion is important, but in the entire list of things to be done, mm-hmm. right? And in the things that we want to fund, there's a lot of times there's not space.
Right.
I think that silos are another challenge for organizations.
Yeah.
Right. I think that advocacy is often the purview of marketing, right?
Right.
And advocacy really is when companies think of advocacy, they think of the output of it. They
right.
think of the case study. They think of the webinar. They think of, right? It's what is the output, as opposed to thinking of advocacy as beginning with the experience, right? Yeah. And it's all about the experience, right? Having a plan to deliver a great experience is important. Taking the time to chart it out. What's the journey? What's the communication flow? What are the contingencies and the what ifs? For example, if your customer has a bad experience, right? What do you do about that? Right? In fact, those customers those 2/3 of customers who are unhappy and would switch, right? If their needs were addressed, and you don't have to be perfect, right. I think customers are forgiving, right? And they want you to win because they've invested in you. Right. If you acknowledge the challenges that they have, communicate with them, right? That goes a long way. So I think it's about the experience and having a planned experience. I think it's tying it to business outcomes, right? We're not talking about advocacy for the sake of advocacy, right? Creating advocacy becomes a business imperative. Right. And so how do we harness advocacy to achieve specific and measurable business outcomes? Right. And to do this, right, it goes beyond marketing. Right. I think advocacy touches every area of the organization because it can, if you're in product, right, it can provide insight and feedback into product or service, right? Customer success, right? Certainly sales and marketing with messaging and so it's important that that each department's needs and wants from advocacy are understood, and then that plan then is created to deliver around that, and that then can help eliminate those silos. I think that the point about the regular feedback loop, is really important, right? Whether it's from an NPS or pulse surveys or whatever other tool. I think the mindset of asking for candid feedback and having the courage to listen and to respond, I think that's huge. And it doesn't mean that you have to accept it all the time, but rather asking it and then having a feedback loop is huge.
Well, I think, and this is all really great insight. What I'm kind of interested in hearing your take on is, obviously part of the time crunch is, just everything else that's going on. It's one more thing on the list. And for some reason, a lot of the times it's, putting this into action falls down that priority list. In terms of like, either automating things, making things more systematic, making advocacy a part of the culture, what have you seen companies do successfully that allow them to maintain momentum in these efforts?
Yeah. I think it starts with the buy-in, certainly. But then, look, one of the biggest challenges that I've had with advocacy. So get beyond the building advocates, right? Let's say we buy into the experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great. We give them a great experience. Let's say that we identify who they are, right? Let's say that we use net promoter score to find those who are 8, 9, 10, who are advocates, right? Let's say that we buy into that. What do you do with them, right? And one of the challenges that we always have is with all of the voice of the customer stuff, it's very time consuming,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we've actually built a process that streamlines that because of the inherent challenges, right? It's time consuming for the organization. It's
Mm-hmm.
time consuming for the customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have a customer reference, right? They love you. They're willing to talk to other people, but they have a day job. So inherently, I think a truism for companies is they have the references. Typically, they probably have 4 or 5 go-to references, and and sales, hammers marketing. I need a reference right now, and I think it's never in the history of sales and marketing has sales said, "Hey, I'm going to need a reference in like 3 months. Can you help me with that?" Right? It's right now.
Yeah.
And so the ability to streamline the identification, the invitation, the capture, right, and then the distribution, right, and what distribution, whether that's to your website or it's to your sales team or it's to social media. I think that there are tools out there that can help you automate that. It's just it's a matter of, I think, making a commitment around, okay, there's a little bit of upfront work, but in the long run, this is going to save us a lot of time and a lot of money.
Well, yeah, and I mean that's just to kind of talk about the work that we've done together is you helped us in putting together our own kind of like customer reference program to address that specific challenge, where what we ended up with was taking a lot of those customer advocates, the people who we are often turning those customer references not just into videos, but segmenting those down into bite-sized chunks. And the way that has actually played out in our own sales process is it allows our sales team to be more proactive of, hey, if we're talking about a paid media engagement, here is, a snippet from one of our customer advocates about why they choose to work with us versus another agency, and really just kind of get down to that 90-second kind of benefit statement. And we've seen a tangible benefit just in terms of sales velocity just with that alone. But then there's also just the experience that you're creating for your advocates of, I'm not pinging the same customer reference 6 times in a quarter to say, hey, can you get on the phone for an hour with this prospect, knowing that you're right, they do have their day job. And so just being able to capture this, but then also use that more proactively, where you're not waiting toward the end of a sales process. You can actually turn it into something that's more closer to a top of funnel thing. And so that's been a huge game changer in that regard for us.
Yeah, the point about video too, I think is a good one, because I think that the way that we all consume content now, video is at the top of the list, right? Yeah. I mean, I think that gone are the days of the traditional case study. I mean, who's going to read a 3-page case study, let alone a full report? And I think that the ability to capture a customer story in video, provide not only it freezes it, right? You have it from that moment in time. You're not going back to them, asking them repeatedly, but it's giving you content, right, that is reusable across all your channels. Yeah. And one of the things that we did that I thought was so great was, from a reference perspective, we talked to just a number of different customers and asked them the same question. Right. And then you're able to then share, all right, we have 5 people that are answering the question of, why did you choose the Star Conspiracy? What was your experience like? Would you recommend them? Right. And so, somebody can come in and look at those and say, gosh, I've heard 5 people talk about their different experiences working with the Star Conspiracy. And that gives me a really good understanding of of what my experience is going to be like.
Yeah.
And it's, and it's not, any more lift for you. And it's certainly not a lift for your customers. So, I think the point you make about making it super easy for your customers to share their story, but then giving you a lot of ammunition.
Oh yeah, and that's been incredibly true. And I mean that point that you said about nobody has the patience to read a 3-page case study is absolutely a fact. And when we, went through an exercise in the past year along with our rebrand to completely revamp the, 5 or 6 dozen case studies that we have internally, it's just like, our case studies now are essentially a PowerPoint slide, and we can have a link to, hey, if it's a website or a portfolio of work or a content asset or, whatever, we can show it. And then it's just like, more often than not now getting into, oh, and if you want to talk to, or you want to hear a reference, you can watch this video here, and making it just really quick and to the point, but then bringing in those credibility elements of, I want to see with my own eyes, what does this look like? But then I also want to hear from someone you worked with about, and it's not even like how you did the work, is what was the experience. And that has been very much a game changer, because it's just like, it allows those conversations to actually get earlier in the sales process, to where you can, you can change the conversation from, do I want to select this vendor, to how do I buy from this vendor? And so, yeah, that's been a huge game changer, and definitely a shift that we've noticed in the market. It's just shortening attention spans. What are you going to do to get your prospects and customers what they need in that moment without overburdening them?
Yeah. I think you make a really good point about, earlier you said, you talked about the sales velocity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I think one of the keys to sustainable advocacy is tying it back to business outcomes, right? Again, it's not advocacy for the sake of advocacy, but how is it that we can drive real business outcomes by leveraging our advocates? And so making sure that you have those metrics, right, to tie, right, activity to outcome. And it's going to change for a lot of organizations, and given where they're at and their realities. But I think the point is that for any given organization, you can put the metrics in place, right, to tie it to outcomes. And I think that cannot be lost.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was engaged with a speaking spot with a former client and prospect earlier this week, and kind of as they were going through their metrics, they're very customer oriented. And one of the things I was happy to see is they not only are tracking, net promoter score, they're tracking product recommendation score. Would you recommend this product? And they're using that to actually guide their product development, which I thought was really brilliant. And what I think is also interesting is, even when in sort of like engagements that we've been involved in, is, the way that we really kind of approach that research is, if we can get, a situation as happened last year with a customer who had something like 70 hours worth of customer conversations that we were able to kind of go back and synthesize, and not, you don't have to transcribe everything. It's going back and doing sentiment analysis against all of that. And what we were able to surface, not only in terms of just like product recommendations, how do you, refine your buyer personas, how do you really zero in your ideal customer profile? There's a goldmine of data there if you just not only take the time to ask, but then kind of go back through that. And I know that that's even work that we brought into our own customer advocacy through our colleague, Aaron Delgatti, who brings in this firm academic kind of approach to what can I learn from people are saying that we can apply in a number of different areas of the business. So you're right. It's just what is important to you from a business, whether it's, how are you going to adjust your product roadmap? How are you going to change your service delivery? What are you going to be doing about implementation and change management? There's a lot of things that you can learn if you simply ask the question.
Yeah. And that goes back to That's exactly right. And that goes back to, eliminating the silos,
Yeah.
right? Because, the feedback that you get from your customers, not only your advocates, but your customers, right? Impacts the entire organization. And so you want to make sure that you're talking to product and what do you want out of this advocacy program, right? CX, what do you want, right? Marketing, do you want feedback on messaging? Do you want feedback on the whole sales experience, right? And getting them to actively help you become better at doing what you do, right?
Right.
And a great way to do that actually, and incorporate, these advocates into, formally into your business is through like a customer advisory board, right? I mean, inviting them in to almost become your customer board of directors to give you feedback and insight into every facet of your business, because their mandate is just that. It's to help you get better at doing what you do, right, across the organization.
And so I'm glad you brought this up, because customer advocacy boards are something that come up a lot of times as a first step, that it's just like, hey, we need to do this. What have you seen that in your experience in terms of successfully not only assembling a customer advocacy board or advisory council, but then leveraging that knowledge and maintaining that momentum over time?
Yeah. It starts with, like all good things, it starts with a plan. but again, it starts with being very clear on what you want out of it, right? To what end are we having this customer advisory board? And that includes voices from, again, across the organization. I think one of the biggest things is, before you get there, is executive buy-in. I mean, you want to talk about the sustainability, right? Then this needs to be at the executive level and having a champion at the executive level, right? But having a plan, making sure that the right people from the right departments are involved. It's about identifying the right people to invite, and it's not just, a successful CAB is not just there to whisper sweet nothings into your ear, right? I mean, you want different perspectives. You want voices from people who, of course, like you and love you, but you also want folks who may not have had a great experience, right? To provide that kind of a perspective,
right?
I think making it focused, each conversation focused. You don't want to boil the ocean, right? With each time you're meeting. So have specific topical focuses, right? With specific outcomes, and then circulate that, communicate the outcome of that, right? And make sure that there's a loop. And then finally, I would say make it super easy, and also make sure that there's a WIFM in there for them, right? It's, what's in it for them, right? I mean, and there are a number of things that are very compelling about being part of the customer advisory board. So what are they for you, right? And making sure that you enumerate that and make that part of the experience, part of the whole package.
Yeah, and typically, and I'm glad you brought up the WIFM component. A lot of the times, and you see this, with brands of scale in our space, is the WIFM really is the opportunity to network with people who can help you along with your career journey, or could potentially be your mentor. And I think that's definitely what is an engagement factor for a lot of customer advisory boards, and how you get people to not only want to join them, but be engaged in it, is they're getting something very tangible out of it. Has that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right about that. As we think about the motivation hierarchy, right? We look at it using the SAPS methodology, right? Status, right? It cannot be underestimated, the power of asking somebody to help you, like to be an advisor to you. That is really powerful, and it's playing to their ego.
Yeah.
Access to some level of exclusivity, right? Power, right? The power and the ability to impact right, to impact the direction of the product,
Mhm.
right? Specifically tailored to your needs, right? That is hugely powerful. And then stuff, right? The swag, the things that are money. But yeah, I mean, there are definite motivations, right? To this, and it's super powerful.
Yeah, and I think that, along those lines, I mean, I think that, um, and I'd be really curious to kind of get your feedback on this in terms of like what you've seen companies do successfully that break down those silos between those kind of functions, because you can put together a customer advisory board, but a lot of times there are moments of either just complete breakdown or disequilibrium between different functions. And I know that when we kind of approach looking at creating either a customer experience vision for a company, where we find something that works very powerfully is when you look at what we identify as kind of the 5 pillars of CX, brand, marketing, sales, product, and customer success. When you start kind of going through each one of those and trying to find what are the points that are breaking, there's a lot of things that you learn cross-functionally when you start kind of like breaking it down from those perspectives, that a lot of times it's not people are deliberately trying to maintain a fiefdom or maintain a silo. It's that they have no idea that that they've actually contributed to building a silo, or what is another function not getting from them that is going to allow them to function better. When you think about that in terms of like, how do you get that kind of cross-functional communication that allows you to fully leverage these customer advocates? What are things that you believe that companies need to be prepared to do or need to act on in order to make sure that that they are able to break down those silos?
Yeah. And for any organizations out there that think that they're unique, where they have, dysfunction and siloed, you are part of the vast majority, not the minority,
Yeah.
right? And to your point, Steve, I think that, oftentimes there's no malice or ill will. It's just that people are busy doing what they're doing, and
Right.
so they don't know, what's happening in other silos. I do think that having a third party, an objective third party, is very helpful to have these conversations, right? Because it takes the onus off of, well, my colleague over here, it takes the politics out of it. And I think, kind of the pressure out of it.
Mhm.
I also think that going back to, having a very clear mission and understanding of what we're trying to achieve, right? And then going out to interview each of the department heads, right? Asking the right questions, and then bringing it all back together into, call it whatever you want, a report or whatever, but reporting back to them so that they see, oh, well, they're coming at from this way, they're coming at from this way, tying it all back to, again, business outcomes, right? And I think that it's not complicated. And I don't think that it has to be, it doesn't have to be a big production. But I do think that having an organized way to facilitate the conversations, right, and ask the questions that need to be answered, I think is really important and very powerful in creating that alignment. Because again, it gives visibility and transparency across the way where they may not be, there may not be any visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I mean, you just made so many excellent points in there about, it's not coming from any malice or ill will. It's people are busy. There's a
Yeah.
lot of things to do. And so, I guess kind of with that in mind is, and I think that, this, especially with this year where a lot of companies are seeing a really challenging, year in the market, and they don't have a shortage of things to do. And in fact, if anything, they're having to do more with less. With I guess all of that in mind, what do you think that companies need to do to make sure that customer advocacy doesn't fall off the radar for them this year?
Yeah. Going back to the experience, right? Redoubling a focus on experience. and making that, moving that to the kind of the central of to the center of the cultural norm, right? Making sure that everybody understands that, the experience is everything, and the experience touches everybody in the organization, right? And so, and I also think, this point about empowering people to make decisions that enhance and further the experience, right? And again, for a lot of organizations, that could be a huge shift that has to come from the top. I also think plan, right? Be planful and thoughtful about, all right, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to, one, make sure that people are having a great experience? Two, if they're not having a great experience, how do we capture that feedback, right? You mentioned NPS before, and NPS is a great tool, I think, and a lot of value is oftentimes left on the table because organizations just look at that number, right? They want that number to go up, but there's so much great value in understanding. All right, well, here's the 8s, 9s, and 10s, right? Which we want to look at, but there's terrific data and terrific insight into, well, who's a 6 and under? Because that represents revenue at risk, right? And if you can find out who those people are that are at risk revenue, and you convert even 2% of them, right? You acknowledge their frustration, you acknowledge their challenge, and you can convert them. That then, right, goes a long way to hitting your revenue growth targets, right? Because you don't have to make that up. So, understanding who they are, and then being very mindful about how you're going to engage them. I think communication is a huge component, right? And not spam communication, but having a methodical cadence of communication, letting them know what's going on, when it's going on, right? So on and so forth. So I think, so there are a lot of tools I think organizations can use. And oftentimes they probably have them there, but I think it's just looking at it through a different lens of, all right, we're going to be in for a tough year this year, right? Let's dust off our customer playbook, right? And refocus on our current customers, right? And try to leverage them for not only retention, but internal growth, and then leverage them for become advocates and champions in the market.
Oh yeah, and we got a question that came in through the Q&A that I think we've started to kind of answer, but I want to kind of build on this a little bit more. It's from Carolyn. Says, what can an organization do today, right now, to take a step toward better customer advocacy? And I think that, and I of course want to get something from you on this, Patrick, but a couple of things that are sort of top of mind with me and sort of how we have been approaching things is, number one, when you have those 9s and 10s, you have those advocates. We're big proponents of, the NPS approach. When you have those 9s and 10s, it's actually taking the time to ask them for a reference. The whole idea is if they are in promoter territory, if they're really a promoter customer, it's asking them. And a lot of times we see those 9s and 10s, maybe we get a great comment that is, it's nice to post it on Slack and show it to the rest of the company, but then what are you doing with it? And that's something you don't want to just kind of leave around, because the other thing that in our experience about, sometimes your best customers, sometimes your customers that are reliably 9s and 10s, they'll come in and they'll give you a 6 or a 5 sometimes, and they're not doing it to be a jerk. They're doing it because they actually care about the conversation, and there are needs that aren't being met. And in successful customer engagements, things don't always go right. Sometimes things get a little bit sideways, but it's just like, if someone has enough trust in you to give you a low score and want to engage you in the conversation, this is something that often comes up in NPS, is it's not about the score, it's about the conversation. And certainly building those kind of systems in place to, how do you then, when you're getting those detractor scores, what is your method for not just having the conversation with them, but then following it up and making sure that you're taking that at-risk customer and bringing them back into, if not promoted territory than into kind of passive territory. So I'm kind of curious, what do you think that organizations should be doing right now to take steps toward better advocacy?
Yeah, and I will come back to that. I want to add on to what you're talking about in terms of identifying them, right? Because you identify the advocates on the NPS score. I think one of the challenges that a lot of organizations have is in the invitation itself, right? So we've identified them. Well, what next? And the invitation can be difficult because we don't want to burden the customer, or if CS is involved, they may not feel comfortable with the ask, right? Either they don't, look, you're not touching my customer, or they don't know how to make the ask. So it's important that at the beginning of the process to make sure, again, that there's we make sure that everybody's getting what they want out of it, but also to make sure that they're equipped with the right tools and the resources they need. So that may mean, in this instance, giving customer success training, right? Training that they need, making sure that they understand the WIFM for them, right? And even giving them tools, maybe templates, right? In making the ask. So I think that that the jump from advocate on NPS to advocate, right, as a champion, right? There's that link that oftentimes I think is frustrating, and there's so making sure that we have the right process and the right tools to make that. I also think low-hanging fruit. We had talked about this earlier. A customer advisory board, I think, is a great first step, because you can ask any of your customers, right? And you can identify them. You can define criteria, right? We want somebody that has been with us for X amount of time. We want somebody that is in a segment. We want whatever the criteria is. You can create that criteria, and then ask 10 to 12 people, right, to join your customer advisory board. That's a great way to, one, get feedback into what you're doing and how you're doing it. By nature of being on your customer advisory board, you're going to have champions, right? And so ask, so that's a great first step. And then also I would also say explore or keep an open mind in terms of what voice of the customer outputs you're asking, because case studies are kind of that's the traditional ask. Case studies are challenging, right? Because they're time consuming. Oftentimes legal or procurement is a hurdle. So a good way that we found around that is to reframe the conversation or the ask in terms of, it's not a case study. It's, we would love to do an executive summary of the work that we've done with you. And you can circulate that internally. And and by the way, we would love that to show that to our customers, right? So reframe those asks, but also I would encourage you to take a different look at the output, right? What Steve and I were talking about, the reference videos, right? It doesn't have to be references. It could be testimonials. It could just be use cases. It could be capturing thought leadership, right, from your customers, right? Just, hey, make the ask of, you've done great work. We would love for you to share with our customers what you've done or your process, right? Share your thought leadership, because by definition, that is advocacy, even if they're not, blatantly advocating for you, right? It's kind of by association.
Well, and I love what you said about the executive summary of work that's been done, because if we kind of go back to how do you expand share of wallets, and the what's in it for me, it's just like a lot of times if you're doing great work with one department, and you're saying, hey, I want to do an executive summary of the work that we've done that you can circulate internally. It's just like part of what you're doing is that's a sales tool for you, and it's basically a confirmation of the value that individual is bringing to their own organization. They want to showcase that. They want to be able to say, hey, look at the great work that I'm doing for our company, and just in terms of like, that whole kind of like the SAPS thing that you're kind of talking about. But also it's just like when you think about expanding your reach within an account, expanding kind of functional association of, we did this great work. Oh, they do this as well. Hey, great. That's kind of, I need to talk to this individual or this company. So it's just like, there's a lot of things in there that I think are incredibly useful, kind of just given the environment that we're in right now.
Yeah, and every organization has these resources at their disposal. I think it's a matter of maybe reframing how you're approaching it, reframing how you're making the ask, or just stepping back and getting organized, right? And thinking through it. Because look, it's not rocket surgery, right? But if if we have a plan, right, that is rooted in specific outcomes, right? To what end are we doing this, right? Then it becomes pretty easy to kind of set up the pins and knock them down, because you do have, you wouldn't be in business if you didn't have happy customers.
Right.
And so, I would also say, tempering expectations, right? Because I think that, I think when we think of advocacy, we think of, right, we think of just a chorus of people. It doesn't have to be an entire chorus. Start with 1, 2, 3. That can be hugely impactful, and just build on that.
Right. Well, just in terms of like, we're getting here to the end of the conversation today, and thank you so much for just everything. This has been, I think, a really impactful conversation. I'm hoping that the audience got some value out of this. But in terms of like, what do I do? How do, if I'm starting from essentially zero, what would you say to those in our audience who are looking to do more with customer advocacy? And are there any dependencies? Do they have to have an NPS program already? Where if they're starting from essentially zero, what does zero need to look like? And what do you think that they should do, say, in the 12 months that are ahead of them to start to kind of move in the direction of building this out in their own organizations?
Yeah, if you don't have an NPS, again, it doesn't have to be super complicated. You can have a conversation with your sales team, or your customer success team, or your customer service team, to identify, customers who are happy, right? Or customers who like us, right? And I think that establishing what is it that you want, low-hanging fruit, right? I think that, okay, well, we want a testimonial. We want feedback. You know what? A great place to start, actually, Steve, is just making the ask of, how are things going?
Yeah.
Right. And asking how things are going.
Yeah. Super
easy, right? And building on that. How are things going? They're going well. They're going great. Would you mind sharing that? Right. I think that's a really easy way to start. Yeah. I would also, simplicity, I think, is key. So keep it simple, right? Keep it simple for you. Keep it simple for your customers, because we're all super busy. We all have finite time. So how is it that you can capture what you want in a way that's efficient for you and efficient for them, right?
Yeah, I think those are fantastic first steps. And I really, I agree. It's just like, the first step is just get started, do something, even if it's just, we want to identify one advocate. I mean, because what we've seen in practice is, it's as, you talk to more people and you learn, it's the reach expands, and then it seems like you find more clarity about how does this connect to other business cases in our own organization and other values, which allow you then to bring a lot more depth to the program itself.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think your point about just get started, don't overthink it, right? I think, understand what you want out of it, but don't overthink it. Just get started, have a conversation, start with one conversation, find one person, and go from there.
Well, cool. Well, it's just like, I would say, let's offer some last words, but I think that those were fantastic last words, on getting started. And if there is anything that the Star Conspiracy can do, Seventh Echo can do, please reach out to us. This is something that we're very passionate about, and we believe has the opportunity to change your year for the better. So, Patrick, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Steve. This has been great.
Been a lot of fun, and we will talk to you again soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.